you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 23, season 2. Got a great episode for you all this week with Howard Allen of Faithful Farms in North Carolina, which he runs with his wife, Roniqua. Howard grew up on a homestead in Jamaica, and we talk about that and how that upbringing sort of influenced his growing practices. We talk about how one of the plots he's using is church land, which is really awesome because churches are one of the biggest landowners in the world. There should just be more farms attached to churches, and honestly, Howard's kind of working on that. Anyway, we dive into that, into Howard's no-till systems, and so much more. Such an awesome conversation, and I could not bring it to you without the help of our show sponsors like Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers on the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Also supporting the show this week, Growing for Market magazine.
Hi, I'm Andrew Mefford, editor of Growing for Market magazine. We're excited to be back sponsoring the No-Till Market Garden podcast, so we made a code for listeners to get 25% off any subscription. Head on over to growingformarket.com and enter the code WORM, that's WORM, for the discount. We're still on the same mission as when the flower farmer author Lynn Basinski founded the magazine 29 years ago, to be a resource written by farmers for farmers with practical ideas and information to help local farms succeed. There are a decade of back issues and articles available online, plus subscribers automatically get 20% off any of the books we sell, including the No-Till book bundle of 3 no-till books listed together at 10% off the cover price, so you can add your subscriber discount and get a total of 30% off the price of all 3. If you do farmers markets, farm stands, CSA, local wholesaling, dream of starting a no-till farm, or a little of everything, if you like what you're hearing on the podcast, go to Growing for Market and use the code WORM for 25% off any subscription.
All right, enough from me. Let's get to this amazing conversation with Howard Allen of Faithful Farms. Howard Allen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jesse. Thank you a lot for having me on.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. Let's start where we always do with this podcast. Tell us a little bit about your farm, where you're located, the acreage you're working on, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so our farm is Faithful Farms. We're located here in western Chapel Hill, located in North Carolina. In terms of our current farm size and land mass that we're actually using, it's about a quarter to a half acre in production. We actually have 3 various sites. Our biggest site is on our neighboring church property, and so that's where our main production site is right now. We also have our own land, which is about half a mile away, and we're currently revamping all the infrastructure there and all the land, and so that will become HQ by summer of this year. And in addition to that, we also have a third property. A friend of mine has a small farm, and she allows me to use her market garden space to do farming there since she doesn't do any farming anymore. So we also use that space to do a small amount of production throughout the regular growing season. So that kind of surmises, our farm space and in terms of size.
Nice. And then you mentioned the church. I want to get into this a little bit with you because one of the things I've actually learned recently that churches are one of the biggest landholders in the States. And I'm always like, and it's funny because Hannah and I will drive by churches and we'll be like, man, that would make such an awesome farm. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and how that agreement sort of came to be?
Yeah. So it first started out with me being the caretaker of this property. So when my church, which is the Notill Practices church, we merged with our new church called Life Church. We had a property here, in the rural parts of the county, and the new church that we were merging with, they were more in the city, so they wanted to stay into the city. So then I kind of by default became the caretaker of this property, and it was kind of like the right time. And also too, I wanted to create a farm ministry, which food is focused. I mean, the center around this farm would be, how do we approach food from a Christian perspective, and what does the Bible say about food, land, and how can we put those things into action, And so that was the initial draw. But then, of course, the reality kicked in is that most people who are alive today are not into agriculture, whether they're in the city or rural area. And so that was like a big wake-up call. And, of course, we do have a few people who, see the bigger picture and want to be a part of this ministry. But it was challenging in the beginning, and it's still challenging now as we continue to work on that farm life ministry and just getting people back to the land and connected with agriculture. So that's the main focus. And, of course, beyond that, we focus more on healthy eating. How can we have more access to food? How can the church, who is, the largest landowner, I think, in the world probably. I mean, most churches have a lot of land. And how can we understand, not understand, but how can we leverage land ownership, and be able to solve some, big challenges, like, food, access, and other inequities in our society. So just thought, that, I would do my small part in forming this ministry, and hopefully others will form, this long and this continues to grow, and see what happens in the future. So that's how it started out. And then as things evolved in the past year and a half, I was given the permission to, use the land also to grow food, so I've been doing that. And so a lot of the infrastructure that we build here, even though it's built by Faithful Farms, is really for the church and for the bigger ministry. And like I said earlier, we have our HQ at our own property that we're currently working on and building the infrastructure. So it's somewhat of a joint venture here on this land, but the goal is that by summer, everything that's here will be totally for the church mission, and then we'll continue to focus on that while simultaneously working in partnership with Faithful Farms, as a for-profit entity, to see how we can continue to work together, for the greater good of the community. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, and it's amazing because I always think about what a huge movement it would be if more churches were involved in agriculture, and I love that sort of approach because it's an enormous population, but like you said, it's a huge landowner as well, and there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So here in North Carolina, recently there is an organization, I'm trying to think of the name right now, but it's called the Faithland Initiative, and basically it's an organization that's designed to bring faith leaders and religious organizations who own land, and bring them together and see how can we repurpose these lands, how can we rethink of the use of these lands, and use them for the greater good of the community. But also, too, as we face these challenges of land access, to, beginner farmers, how can the churches and other landowners, help, to solve these problems, So one of the main things is to create partnerships, between, landowners, and either beginner farmers or existing farmers, so we can make use of those lands and solve, problems, that are locally affecting us.
Is your church kind of part of your market?
So my church is not part of my market at all. And the way I designed it is that everything that we grow food here, and we try to get a weekly distribution into the church every Sunday. So after service, congregants can come out, and we have, a couple of tables, with food, So basically it looks like a farmer's market setup display, but you just walk up and get whatever you like. And so that's the whole idea, is to provide food for the congregation. And so we don't sell it. I think maybe in the future there could potentially be maybe some for-profit way about doing this. But right now, since the church is a nonprofit, the easiest way we focus on how can we provide, healthy foods and, for free to our congregants. And long term, the goal is that we can do this every single week, of the year, and, just to strengthen our community and also, to help, congregants, financially, because a lot of people struggle with food costs. And we really never talk about those things, there are big stigmas around that. So we figure if we can have access, or easy access to food, then, we think the rest hopefully should take care of itself. So that's been the focus and not really marketing. In terms of markets, though, Faithful Farms, we sell at the Carrboro Farmers Market here in Carrboro, and we sell at the local restaurants. And we're working on a couple of retail sales outlets right now. So that's kind of where we are in terms of marketing.
Nice. And then in terms of the kinds of things that you're producing, so you're not doing any sort of CSA, right?
No. So CSA, I actually started with a CSA several years back, just out of my backyard. And, I think I went up to probably the highest around 15 subscribers. And so that was my initial start into farming. Before it went kind of crazy. And so right now we took a step back from that because the model just doesn't make sense for us in terms of giving us the ability, to be more agile as a startup. And, so farmers market is where it's at in terms of most of our sales. And then now we're building restaurants and retail slash wholesale. In terms of crops that we're producing, mostly veggies. I would consider us a classic market garden. I've watched, a lot of the guys in the space, who are more known, the Kurt Stones and, John Martier and so forth. So we're in that similar route, but short term and long term, we want to get into other things, such as food production and so forth. But we feel like this is the way to get started, to bring in revenues and grow really fast. And from there now we can get into the ideals and the long-term propositions that will make sense, even beyond my lifetime.
You talked about doing that first CSA out of your backyard. What kind of got you to farming? I mean, was that something you were doing, gardening in your backyard, or was there, kind of what got you into that?
Yes. So even background way before that. So I'm a native of the island of Jamaica. I was born there and migrated here in the early 80s and kind of back and forth until the 90s when I stayed here permanently. So I've always had some type of agricultural exposure, whether it's just growing up on, our homestead in the countryside of Jamaica, and raising our own foods and so forth. So I really got a early dose of that as a child. And of course, but then we moved to New York City. And so it's just like a night and day in terms of, just the scenery and agriculture. But later in life, as I ventured south and settled with my family, I just wanted to give my kids a semblance of what I had in Jamaica, to walk out the door and to get fresh foods, to go outside and be able to forage on different types of things. And just wanted to give them some semblance of that since we're not in a tropical environment. And that's where it started, just to provide that. And eventually led to one thing and just growing more and more. And you start having enough to give to your neighbors. And someone said, hey, you should make a subscription box, CSA. I'm like, what is that? And things just kind of dominoed and went into the CSA model. And I did it for a while. And it was really easy, every Friday morning for about 2 or 3 hours, I'll pack about 10 boxes and take about a 30-minute drive into town and drop them off at houses. And, once a month, I'll get, some checks. And, it was a nice little, extra $600-700, every month, along with my regular salary job. So, it was a win-win at the time, but I never then thought that I would be farming full-time. Absolutely not. But over time, it just kind of made sense. And it's somewhat, I believe it's a call-in because the land, I believe, have been calling me, especially in the past 5 years. It's just been, come closer. So the closer I got to the land, just the more sense everything made. It's like, okay, you were meant to be here. You were meant to do this. Now it's about figuring out the how.
Are you able to farm full time now?
Yes. So we're so blessed that my wife right now, she still works a conventional job. And so 2 years ago, I was able to walk away from my conventional job and be able to do this full time, the full time farming ministry, and there's other things in my community, and also to quality of life with family, So that was the trade off there. And so the goal is that in a couple of years, hopefully by next year, my wife will have the option of leaving her conventional job. Yes, so I walked away from that and I was able to, work on this full time, get it up really fast and going. And so right now, am I making a living from it? Absolutely not. But the whole idea is to reinvest every dollar that we get back into the business and to grow exponentially. That way the business itself can be a true business and not one where I'm tied to the farm. So that has always been the goal from day one, that the farm will generate income. It will provide for the whole family. But, for the first couple of years, it's going to be just reinvesting.
Yeah, that's always important to point out, too. It's just those first few years, maybe having to have some off-farm income, reinvesting so much of the money that you make right back into the farm and setting yourself up.
Yes. So in addition to that, I would say that once I left my main job, I still had a part-time job because I've taught as a adjunct instructor at our local community college here for the past 10 years in the culinary department. And, of course, that's my background. I'm a classically trained chef and chef instructor at Alamance Community College here in Alamance County, North Carolina. So that has been a great job. So that has held me down part-time to have some income. But actually this year, I'm actually stepping away from that, at least for this first semester, so I can really focus on the farm intensely going into this first half of the year. So the goal is that right now, we're not taking any crazy vacations. My goal is to focus, get this business to the status of a true business, and I'll talk about that later on. And once we're there, hopefully by the end of this year, then we can get back into some other things, so that's the goal right now, is to just build, and build.
Yeah, and then are you going to keep all three of those plots as you build, or are you kind of trying to pull back and focus solely on your own plot there?
Yes, so a big part of it is that we are increasing our farm help this spring. We're bringing on some really good help. We've been so blessed with the help so far, but we're bringing on even better help. And so the main thing is that we want to focus on our headquarters, which is, of course, that's our property. And so we want to make sure that everything goes into it, all the efforts. So I want to make sure that I have all my time dedicated to that to get it off the ground, because once that's up and running, man, that's like the centerpiece of the business. And from there, we can do so much more. For example, right now we're in the process of wrapping up a passive solar greenhouse. And then we want to then add on a processing, a pack shed on the back side of that, on the north wall. So those are projects that we hope to get finished in the next 6 months. So from there, we can have our GAP certification by the end of this year. We'll be in retail outlets. And from there, the goal is that the business will then snowball going into 2021 and beyond.
Right. I didn't even think about, when you were saying that you're on 3 different plots, I didn't think about the sort of food handling and processing element of that. So you're having to really kind of haul it all, anything you harvest on those other 2 plots to kind of a centralized location to wash and pack, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So that's the thing right now. So like I said, starting out, it's the bootstrap mentality. Of just doing what you have to do, because you have to do it. But we've always had the long-term goal, of bringing everything under one roof, where it makes sense in terms of design, logistics. I mean, all those nitty-gritty details, that businesses oftentimes have to deal with. We wanted to make sure that when we finish this, that this was going to be our central location for years to come. Even though our land space there is probably going to be about 1 acre of production when we're at our max, but we think that's plenty enough for us, for at least like 10 years, and then we can decide beyond that.
It's funny how much can really be packed onto an acre. And because you can stack so many things too. I mean, you can fit perennials into an acre, you can fit mushrooms into an acre if you wanted to. It's a really good amount of space.
Oh yeah, I mean, because our total property, our land mass is 2.7 acres. Most of it is woods right now. We have about a half acre cleared out for farming in the back of our house. Almost a similar setup to Josh's situation, but just a little bit more land. So we have a lot of room to play. We have a lot of woods, some mixed hardwoods, some mixed pine. So we're really taking this approach slowly in terms of how much woods we decide to clear at one particular time, and what other operations we want to add into the farm system as we go into the future. So the overall arching goal is we start out as a market garden, really agile, and then as we go long term, we adjust into a more diverse operation where we'll be doing mushrooms, microgreens, so forth. But slowly working things in long term. We're going to add some fruit trees, so forth. Maybe a small orchard. We're going to do tons of herbs for culinary purposes. So we want to be strategic as we grow. In the sense of almost seeing every additional thing as a additional operation coming into the venture. So if it doesn't make sense for the overall farm venture, we're not going to do it at all, or maybe at that time.
No, it's great. I mean, it is something that I think that my wife and I, we talk a lot about the future, but didn't have like a specific business plan for it. Until the last few years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of been something that we came to late, and I regret that. I think that it's really great to start your business kind of knowing that you do have to stay agile in the beginning to an extent, and then also having a sort of goal that you're working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thing, I've gotten a lot of takeaway in terms of business from a lot of the Silicon Valley guys. And just looking at how, your Silicon Valley guys, your tech guys, how they start businesses, the whole idea of being agile, being flexible, when you first start out, trying to get those products, out there, that first iteration, of, let's get some, lettuce out there and see if our customers want lettuce, and then from there, how can we double down and now increase the production? Then from there, how can we, supply this year round? So it's just a type of, strategic way of looking at it. And so versus doing like the traditional business plan, we opted to do the business model canvas. I might be saying that correctly, or the business canvas model. But it's basically a one-page business plan that you can see the overall arching view of your entire business, and it gives you, just a bird's eye view at all times. You can go and change things as they, unfold, and it just makes life a lot easier. And you're not bogged down looking at this traditional, business plan about, what you're going to project, because things change so fast. I mean, as a quick, hailstorm can wipe out, your whole crop, and suddenly whatever numbers you were projecting are now zero. So being able to be agile, I think, is very important in the beginning. But definitely, we want to have long-term, goals in terms of where we want to go and what does this look like down the road. And of course, those things are never guaranteed because, life is life. But we're having an idea and somewhat of a roadmap. I think we're able to look and say, okay, well, we're off here, or we're not there, or, so forth. But the importance that something is there to guide us, but not necessarily to, push in a specific area, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it not only does it make sense, but I think that the idea of having a single page business plan is really brilliant.
Yes.
I'd not heard that before, but I really love that idea. Because business plans, I've written them and they're several pages long, and once I'm done with it and I feel good about it, I never look at it again.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think as farmers, we are great at, all the aspects, I think, of farming, but one of the areas where I think we have weaknesses, and I think a lot of farmers don't talk about it, is the whole part of the business part of farming. And so, farming is a business, in and out. And so I think we have to approach it in that sense. And so it can be really challenging because a lot of us, we're really passionate about what we do and how we do it in terms of the agricultural part. But the business part, I think, is where we oftentimes struggle. And then those struggles ultimately come back to, interfere with what we're passionate about. So I think it's important that we, look at it as it's a business, in and out, and that's it.
Yeah, no, it's extremely important because so much, a lot of us just want to get out there and get our hands dirty and grow some food for our community, which is great and important. But if you don't have a business plan, you're limited in how long you're going to be able to do that.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and it's one of those things where with a business plan, however extensive or limited it is, it's just something to, guide you, so when you have those brilliant ideas at 2 a.m, to wake up back, at 8 and say, you know what, that was a good idea at 2 this morning, but after some thought and look at the business plan, we're just not there yet, or maybe, that could be a good idea. So it's always something to kind of keep us grounded.
Hey y'all, not sure what you're doing this Valentine's Day weekend, but we will be in San Diego for our first West Coast No-Till Intensive on February 15th, 2020, and would love to see you there. This event will feature Jared Smith, whose work we fell in love with last year when he was on the podcast. He's doing nearly 3 acres of lasagna-style gardening with hedgerows and tons of interplanting and these really wide beds. Super interesting stuff. And we were introduced to Jared by Stephen Cornett of Nature's Always Right, who will also be presenting on his more urban scale, but also on gathering one's own fertility from the farm using techniques derived from KNF. And then I'll be presenting as well on adapting your system to your context using our system here at Rough Draft Farmstead as the example. There's going to be a field walk as well because the venue where the intensive will be is also a farm where Jared is setting up beds. So we'll actually get to see what that whole process looks like. More info at notillgrowers.com/events, and hope to see you there. Back to Howard.
So I kind of want to change gears here and get back to something you'd mentioned earlier was sort of your homestead in Jamaica. I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit about what that was like, and also just kind of generally what the agriculture was like or is like when you were, growing up.
Yeah, so man, I was so blessed. My parents, they moved to England in the 1950s, had a nuclear family, had, careers, worked for 20 years, retired, and came back home. And then I arrived, right? So I was a big surprise of the family. And so growing up in the countryside of Jamaica, my dad was retired. So, so he was, I guess you could call him a stay-home dad. And it was just a great experience to, wake up every day, to be like a free-range kid. You really didn't have to worry about the things we worry about today. Small community, rural, mostly agrarian, and people just bartered and traded. People grew food to take to markets. It was a really country kind of place, warm, loving. We had tons of rivers. So it was just an awesome childhood. I mean, just the best childhood, ever. And again, as I became a parent, going back to what we talked about earlier, just wanted to give my kids some semblance of that, just a little bit of that. And so my kids today, they're fortunate enough that they have, a similar thing where they can, go out in the backyard and pick fruits, or come up to the farm and get fresh veggies, so it's just an amazing thing to watch, and to see their knowledge of food, at their age. My youngest daughter, she is 12, and my son, my baby, he is 8. And their knowledge of food is just so extraordinary, and to the population it is, but to us it's just a normal, like, you should know about food. Food is the basics of our life, but it seems amazing, in terms of, our society today. But but my homestead in Jamaica, that was the foundation of everything here today. I have, great parents who are no longer with us, but, their knowledge and expertise, lives through me, and I try my best to continue to carry that on. In terms of practices, a lot of the agriculture there would be very similar to what we call permaculture here. It's just living with the land, working with the land, a lot of what we call chop and drop. So, when you finish with like a thing, for example, a banana tree, once you harvest the banana, there's several of the shoots, you chop down that plant, chop it up and kind of drop it and use it as a mulch around the plant, to cover the ground, and that will slowly decay, and compost and work its way back into the system. So that was most of the agriculture that I saw. The whole idea of chemical usage, I hardly saw that. I mean, growing up, there are a few people who bought some things, but these things are, these things that we call, like 1010 and so forth. They were like really expensive. So, and people just couldn't afford them. So natural farming was just the way of the land. And if things grew, we grew more of it. If it didn't grow, we probably didn't grow it at all. So there's tons of things like, breadfruits, just all the exotic tropical fruits that you can find in most tropical and subtropical countries. We had access to those things, mangoes, papayas, avocados. So, yeah, it was just an amazing environment to grow up in. Yep.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I'm wondering if that played into kind of the next thing I'd like to talk about is your no-till practices. How did those sort of come in? How did that sort of come into play?
Well, as like anything else, once you start to do it in life, you kind of look back to see, all right, what kind of reference do you have from your past? And so I was able to look back and just remember, guys clearing an acre, maybe 2 or 3 guys, with machetes, clearing a whole acre of land, because, it's on a hillside, at like a 55-degree slope, and, there's no equipment that you have or will do that anyway. So just learning from just all those techniques in terms of what they did, and how they planted and so forth, it just came, natural to me that in terms of farming, that my job was not about producing crops. That, my role was to have a relationship with the land and to get better acquainted with the land and our coexistence, to one another, and what is my role and how can I be more intentional in that role. And so, the two just married really well. And so today, the no-till part of it is more, okay, well, I did learn to disturb the ground, but how can I disturb the ground at least as possible? So that's been the focus that we've been working on with our farm venture here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe let's just really dive into that for a little while. In terms of maybe just starting a garden from scratch, I always like to hear how everybody does this a little bit differently. I'm curious what your approach is or was.
So my approach starting out was with tillage. So we did till, and there was one area that I didn't have to till because the soil was just so good. So I used a regular fork to kind of broad fork it and add compost and worked it in and plant. But here we have a lot of clay. And so the clay, in terms of its ability to hold moisture, so for nutrients, is really good. However, it gets a lot of hard panning, and yeah, it's just challenging to work with. But for good stewardship, it's probably some of the best soil ever. So our goal in terms of getting started was to be able to go in, work with the tractor, add compost, and also compost the wood chips. We have a company here that they compost their wood chips after they chop them. So we bought some of that to add it into the soil, and so we were able to till in that compost and add more compost, some really good stuff from a company called Brooks Contractors here. And from there, we're able to start immediately, to plant. And from there, we continue to just add compost until a point now where it's not really necessary for most of our beds to add compost. Beyond maybe once or twice a year now. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the basic setup that we've been doing. It's tillage first and then no-till.
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting because especially in clay, I think that one mistake no-till people that are interested in no-till make is they just start out by covering hard compacted clay with compost. And that can be a really, like, if the goal is to increase photosynthesis and microbial populations and, and sequester carbon and all those things that we all want to do that help grow better food. Sometimes that one-time tillage actually sets you up to do that more rapidly and for a longer period of time than not doing it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a case by case basis, and it depends on where you are. I think each person has to make their own decision. Depends on your time, resources, all those things. I think add to the equation, and ultimately will help you in your decision. But for us, we thought that tilling in the beginning would be better. Of course, we have to shape our beds, our permanent beds. So I mean, it's it's quite challenging to get around the actual, like not bringing a tractor in there. But again, for us, that worked. And of course, I was by myself, when we first started. So I just did what I thought was, the best thing. And once we built the system and we had our beds, they're permanent. Then after that, there's no need to bring in a tractor. And of course, we got a BCS. But I haven't used my BCS, maybe 6 months. So, it's kind of one of those things where once it's set up and it's working, you really, there's no tilling involved at all. Just right now we're using a scuffle hoe and a rake, and we still use a roller just to press when we're doing like a fine seed bed. We just roll across it, but beyond that, man, that's it.
That's cool. So take us maybe through a bed flip, if you would. Like, I know that you do some interesting stuff with bed flips. So, and I saw the other day that you were using a mower too, a little push mower. So can you talk about some of the ways you flip beds and
Yes.
what your sort of preferences are?
So, so in terms of flipping beds, we focus on the type of crops that are currently in the bed and the crops that are going to be coming in our bed based on our rotation. So, for example, you talked about the last post I did on flipping those beds. So that particular house is a 50-foot house, standard Farmer's Friends Caterpillar house, and we have 4 rows of greens, baby arugula and kale. So this time of year, it's cold, so not a lot of biological activity, not a lot of heat. So I decided to get, the mower with the bag, and we're going to flip the entire house. So it was easy to go in there and do that. Just go through, mow it, pull up all of that greenery, throw that on the compost pile, and then all of the stubs in the ground are left there. And then we just tarped it literally for 1 week and just let it sit for a week. And also, too, we torched. So we torched first, or flame weed, just to, to kind of bake those stumps. And then we covered for a week. And then we uncovered. We then amended with some Harmony certified fertilizer. We raked that in the top of the surface. We then wet down the beds really well. Then we put down our irrigation and our landscape fabric with the burnt holes, and then we replanted. So that's like a winter flip for our beds. And that was something that I tried. It worked out, and we'll probably do it in the future again and maybe try some other things. And so that's like a quick flip. In the summertime, it's the same thing except for now we have heat. So inside of a house, it's easy to put that tarp down, and so we really don't even have to flame weed because it's so hot that, between that tarp and the heat of the sun, everything will die, in a few days. Like whatever's left, there won't be any regrowth. But the main thing is that we're leaving all those stubs in the ground and all the root system. That's even the best part. The whole root system of the soil, of all those plants are in the ground, so the soil structure is held together. And that's the main thing that we focus on, is how can we not disturb that structure of that soil by leaving all those goodies back there, all of the, the whole environment in terms of, mycelium, all the life in the plant, the different layers. If that's intact, it's our theory that, the plants will have a better environment to thrive. You have, I think, better chances of fighting diseases, less leaching out of your soil, and so forth. And also, too, I think, better establishment for your transplants that are going in, because the mycorrhiza is still intact in the soil. So they're just going to jump right in there and go right into that network versus having to, be transplanted and forming new networks, So that's kind of our approach in doing that.
Yeah, that's cool. It's funny, the flame weeder thing, that's something that we found too, is that especially with things like arugula and baby greens, baby lettuces, and those sorts of things, we mow it, and then we run over it with the flame weeder to sort of cauterize it. and it does prevent it from growing back. We did that once and then immediately transplanted tomatoes right on top of that, and I don't think maybe one arugula plant came back.
Yeah.
and it could have just been a seed that didn't germinate the first time. So yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
my favorite current use of the flame weeder, because otherwise we don't use it a lot. It doesn't do a lot for our weed populations, but that is one use that I think is really great.
Yeah, and also too, I think overall in that setting, there are times when depends on the crop that's going in, we may add compost to the beds at that time too. But again, it's just compost on top. I'm still debating right now whether I should invest in a broad fork. And that's something that, we haven't been doing a lot because the soil is really good since we did. So it's like, I mean, even, the broad forking is somewhat tillage. So we're looking at that this year and see how the soil is, the texture, and if we decide to do that, the goal is to broad fork when we add compost. So we'll add compost on top of the beds, and then we'll broad fork so that way that compost can kind of slip into the soil and get down into, the crux of, those little nooks and crannies. So that's the approach if we decide to do that.
Yeah, that's a good way to use the broad fork. We've found that some beds no longer need it, and some beds are still kind of compacted from like previous tillage. We've kind of found that the broad fork is a really brilliant tool for just being able to use it where you need it, and it slowly kind of makes itself obsolete. And I think that's a really good. It could be a really useful tool in that way.
Yeah, and also too, with the broad fork, for me, I've been hesitant to get one because it's just an additional tool to use. And from me watching the farm scene, I've realized that, you get some tools, they're awesome in the beginning, but then, after a while, you really don't need them. So my approach is that if I don't have to use a tool, how can we find a way around without buying an additional tool? And how can we use less tools, versus trying to build our tool arsenal? So we've been really careful about, okay, if we don't need it, let's not buy it, because it's just one thing, to look at that you're not using. So.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get sort of entranced by all the different tools that are out there. But it's funny because I think you can start a perfectly good farm with a scuffle hoe, a shovel, a wheelbarrow, a bucket, and a rake.
Yep.
And you'd be fine. But I mean, obviously, like a good seeder helps, and a good, maybe paper pot works for certain people. So it's one of those things where it's fun. I think when you're starting out, or it's maybe even smart when you're starting out to start with those bare minimums, and then just see what you can do without those more expensive tools. That's a great approach. You all are growing year round too. Are you growing in the middle of the summer and the middle of the winter?
Yeah. I mean, we're going year round, man. I mean, we're just like on all cylinders nonstop. Right now, our greenhouses are packed, and we're just cranking out produce, man. So the outside, we have a few things outside. We didn't expect much of them. So we have some broccoli that were late, some cauliflower that were late, and they popped up a few small heads, and they got frozen this past week. So we may go through this weekend when things go over and salvage them. But beyond that, everything is on the covers. We have carrots that are outdoors, and I think that's one of the ways that we think going forward, and especially this coming year going into winter, we'll focus on crops that can withstand, the coldness and all the different variables in terms of climate, and then everything else indoors. So, a lot of the areas that we won't be planting, if we don't have carrots or something that can withstand that, we'll just cover crops for the winter, and this makes life a lot easier. Yes, but year-round, I mean, here in North Carolina, it's pretty easy in terms if you have tunnels, because our weather fluctuates a lot, and it's usually mild overall. So it's more figuring out what to grow and how to do it and be consistent. That's the challenge, I think, where each farmer faces, and, depends on the operation. You'll find different ways of how we approach certain things.
Yeah, and one thing I actually wanted to ask you some technical questions about the bed setup was in terms of bed width in those tunnels and in the field? Are you working with 30-inch beds, or have you changed that?
Standard 30-inch beds, either 100 feet in the houses. We have a few 50-foot houses. Yeah, so either 50-foot beds or 100-foot beds, all 30-inch, standardized. Yep.
And then are you raising the beds as well, or you kind of just left them level?
They are slightly raised, and that's due to just, well, when we started, we intentionally raised them. So we dug out the pathways, the walkways, throw them on top of the beds, and then we fill in the walkways with wood chips and basically level it back out the ground. But of course, over time, as you walk the paths and you're adding compost, they seem like they're slightly raised. If you're looking at it, maybe 2 inches raised, so they're visible raised, but not by much. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was landscape fabric, and this is something I for whatever reason at this point we haven't even really talked about it much on the podcast. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you do the hole burning, and then how you manage to keep track of which holes are in which, like how you organize that, because that's always been something for me. Is we did a little bit of it in the beginning, and I actually am glad we did a little landscape fabric in the beginning, because I think it helped to knock back some weed populations. But managing those was a little bit tough, like rolling them up, keeping them organized. Do you have any advice in that way, and maybe just talk a little bit about how you use your landscape fabric?
Yeah. So I love landscape fabric, for the reasons of, just mitigating weeds, less dirt on, plants, just a lot of benefits. And so we have a lot of landscape fabric down. We just cover areas that are just, going to be like weeds, wiregrass, Johnson grass. We just cover them and just kill them out. So that has helped. But in terms of production, we like it because we're able to use it over and over. So we have, for example, on our lettuces, we have, 6-inch spaces. And actually this year we're moving to 8-inch spaces, for various reasons. But it's great, man. You burn it once and you can use these fabrics. I've been using some now for over 3 years and continue to use them. So when we're using them, once we finish with a crop, and we take off the bed, we will fold them up and we kind of walk it from one end to the other. And we continue and we fold it up. And so the idea is based on how we fold it up. It's kind of hard to explain. But by doing that back and forth fold, it's, of course, it gets folded up nice and neatly and you can put it away. But when it's time to deploy this, you just put it down, staple one end, grab the other end, and it's a walk. And the whole, 100 foot or 50 foot just unravels and lays on top of your bed in just one walk. And I think I might have to do a quick video on that and post it on Instagram so others can see that. But I find that to work really well. So it's easy for one person to do. And so a lot of things that I've done, it was like, okay, me by myself, how can I do this in the most efficient way? And so now my employees I'm not passing on these things. So, one person could do it or two can do it, but know that it's a very effective way of either covering your beds or uncovering your bed and fold them up and put them away. So they've been very easy to manage. And, you can, pack up 20 rolls in a smaller area and you won't even notice it. So I love it. And as we go into the future, I'll see us using less of it just because we don't have the weeds. But especially this time of year over winter when we're doing long-term crops that are going to be in the ground for 4 to 5 months, your kales and so forth. Yes, I'm always going to use landscape fabric. Again, because wintertime, it helps with, keeping the soil warm. But also, it acts as a mulch. And I've noticed, for example, on all the crops, with the root systems, they tend to come up to the surface, versus when you don't have cover. So if you were to pull up a landscape fabric, you can see all the roots of whether it's a chard, and the chard roots are really pretty, or a celery. So from this, we know that the roots are getting a ton of nutrition from the surface. Another side note, and don't want to go off too far here, but there's so much worm activity now in our soil since we've been building it that, the plants just grow a lot better because all the worm droppings that are on top of the soil, but they're under the covers. Now the plants have access to that. So it's just a win-win. The soil stays warmer. It's easy to warm up during the daytime. Yeah, it's just a win-win overall.
Yeah, that's great. And it makes sense to use something like that, especially in the wintertime, with just being able to keep your soil so much warmer. Yeah, we've seen, I mean, when we've done that in the past, the response, the plant response from having that warmer soil, especially in the cooler months like early spring and in the winter, is tremendous. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of folding it, because I think it probably answers both of my questions in terms of like how you organize it, because you can see your spacing, I'm assuming, right? When you're looking at it flat, you can see what spacing is burned into it.
Oh man, yeah.
And then
yeah, I mean it's really easy to see the spacing. And so for example with the lettuces we know that like 6x6, as you see it, 4 cross, straightforward. With like kales and your brassicas, your bigger things, those are going to be 12 inches apart. So, I mean, you can take one look at it and say, okay, yeah, that's that and that's that. And we only have 2 varieties. So, we're not doing, crazy different types of, arrangements for different plants. It's just either 6 inches or 12 inches. And like I said, we're going to move to 8 inches for lettuces and other plants, but it's the same concept. We still have 4 rows on the bed, and they're just going to be 8 inches apart. And we think the plants will do better with that kind of spacing. Oh, and also too, I don't have to use a gritter, like on the soil. Which I'm not against a gritter, but if it's just one thing that you don't have to use, and then this one tool can give you multiple benefits. To me, it makes sense. And in the future, as like right now, the soil is really good, so we don't have to use landscape fabric in most of our beds. But like I said, in the wintertime, we do it because it makes sense. Weed mitigation, we only have to do the walkways because we're using the 3-foot ones. And I'm thinking next year we might even start to add more of the 4-foot ones. So that way we don't even have to weed the walkways. I mean, I just don't want to weed, dude.
Yeah, right. We don't want to spend our time weeding.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because I talk to people are always, asking why not till, like, and I think everybody expects me to immediately go to the ecology, and that is a big part of it for me. But also, I don't want to weed. I'm a really lazy farmer. Like, I don't want to do those things. I'd rather just have it be done, and in the middle of the summertime, I'm not spending my time out baking and with a collinear hoe and in between plants. Like, that's what drives me crazy. So.
All right, last interruption from me. Just got to say we have some amazing supporters. We just hit our 400th supporter, in fact, this week, which is just amazing, you all. It enables us to do so much, including this podcast and videos on our YouTube channel, which, in fact, Howard has done several of those videos, so go check those out. And I hope if you are not a patron that you will consider signing up at patreon.com/farmerjesse or kicking us a few bucks over at Venmo to @NoTillGrowers, because not only do you get discounts on events and such, but at certain levels, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Adam Hensley, Bob and Ann Patton, C-Mac Small, David Williams, Eric Schlellner, Esoterra Culinary, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Freya Farm, Grant Timms, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Jay McCombs, J.M. Fortier, Jeffrey Hayes, Kevin Keene, Christine Albrecht, Kyle, Liam Miller, Marc-Andre Giroux, Mike Dillon, Mike Garcia, Pandora, Patricia Jones, Ryan Gosser, Steve Larson, Terry Barr, Tiffany Jackson, Tim Baldwin, Weaver Acres, Wild Mountain Seeds, William Henpen, and Yannick LaPlante. Thank you so much to everyone who supports the show however you can, even if it's just sharing it with your friends. We really appreciate that. So other than that, let's get back to Howard.
Yeah. I mean, and I love the innovation of all the tool makers, and I want everyone to continue doing that. I mean, they're great. I love to watch the videos, but at the same time, I cringe, at seeing someone go down, like 100-foot lettuce bed with a linear hoe or whatever hoe, and go through in between lettuces. To me, dude, it's just a waste of my time. And if I don't have to do that, I'm not. And there are times when we don't use landscape fabric. So like from spring to fall, we go straight into the soil, and of course we just got the paper pot transplanter. So, but then again, during summertime, even if we have a few weeds in our beds, I'm just not going to touch them because the crops are rotating so fast that the few weeds that actually propagate, they're not going to do anything because they're going to be out of there in about 20 days. So still, if I don't have to weed, I'm just not going to weed. We'll pull that weed when we pull out the whole crop, and not spend any particular time, like having a day when we just weed. It's just not one that brings back any type of return. I think I stole that one from Curtis Stone where, if it doesn't have a return, just how can you get rid of it?
Yeah, I think that if it's not planting or harvesting, I want to do less of it. And that's always my philosophy is if it's not putting it in the ground or taking it out and taking it to market, then I want to do less of it. You mentioned there the paper pot. Have you got to try all that yet?
Oh, yeah, dude. Oh, man. Yeah, I've got it last fall from one of our local farmers who they couldn't get it to work in their system for varying reasons. And so they wanted to get rid of it, and it was a great deal, and I just grabbed it. And I have used it, I would say, at least 10 times already and tested it on different things, spinaches and so forth. And I really like it. And so right now we're just trying to find what works best for it and incorporate it into the system. So we see ourselves using that tool mainly between spring to fall, on the quick turnaround crops. Everything that's going to be in there for 28 days, 35 days. Those are things that we want to do in the system. During the winter time, we find that we'll probably use it less for all the different reasons. We have row covers down, we have low tunnels. It's just a lot to get inside of a house and, to do all that with the paper pot. But we think at least half of the year, especially when it counts, because, again, crops are going in fast, you're coming out fast. So being able to have, for example, Salanova lettuces on a 100-foot bed, it takes, one person 2 hours to plant that. Paper pots, really slow, a half hour. So
right.
You can't beat that.
Yeah, that time is important.
Yeah.
And are you having to do anything different to get those? I mean, obviously not the landscape fabric, but is there anything else you're having to do differently to get those beds prepped, or is it?
No, it's the same way. We use drip irrigation and overhead, but the drip tapes, once we pull up the fabric, we just pick up the drip tapes, we drop them in the walkway, we work on the beds, and then we put the drip tape right back on there. Yep.
Okay.
And yep. So that has worked out really well. So bed prep is pretty easy to do. And the main thing was from day one to develop a system, kind of going back to that business model again, and approaching farm like a business. For example, looking at it from the franchise model, and that's another terminology I want to talk about, the franchise model in growing a business, and how can we build a farm that, if we chose to, we could replicate this thing 5 times or 500 times. What does your farm system look like? Can you pick up this farm and duplicate it, across the country? Can I pick up Faithful Farms, the concept, and take it to Kentucky, next door to your place, and set it up, in 90 days? And so that's another part of it too that has been the main focus from day one, is to work on the model of the farm. So working on SOPs, which I'm doing now over winter. How we flip beds, how we harvest. All the details that go into a farm, that we as farmers think about on a daily basis because it's our passion, but our employees, may not. And so just having the structure that anyone could come in and follow, I think it's important. And small farms have to, adapt these measures, or, it's going to be challenging.
I don't know if I love the idea of of farms franchising, but I love the idea of approaching your farm like you want it to be something you could franchise.
Well said. Because the whole idea is to, if we view it from that perspective, then if you think about how franchises work, they create a model, they work out all the kinks, they put in all the efficiencies, and then now they replicate and just replicate. So I think with a farm is to build a farm with that mindset. And what that helps, I think, is helps us to be more efficient, to be more lean, and to be a business that actually functions and does what it is supposed to do independently of the owners. Now, franchising, I'm not in agreement with franchising farms and stuff, but the model of how we build a farm, I think, is very important because then we're focused more on systems. So everything on my farm is a system. A hoop house is a system, and it's a complex system that has all the systems, tarping systems, watering systems, so forth. So from that approach, it's easy to operate. And I believe by doing so, if, let's say, I was to transition, from this earth, the farm technically could still function because it's a functioning entity on its own that has all its procedures built in, and it doesn't need any one individual to make it operate.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting too because if you think about it like a franchise, and especially in your position with working with a church, if other churches were like, "Hey, I really like this. Could it work at our church?" and you handed them a manual and you said, "Yeah, this is it."
Exactly. And that's what we're working on right now because I'm working with the Faith Land Coalition, and that's exactly what I'm doing, is helping also other farmers who want to create farms. Because I have tons of people asking me at least once a week, "Hey, I want to create a farm. Can you help me, plans?" So this kind of led me into, already what I'm doing, but more specifically, okay, if someone has $5,000, how can they start a farm and what would that look like? So I just recently created a small prototype of how we can start a farm, for less than $5,000, and have, infrastructure, hoop houses to get started, like a phase 1, phase 2, for less than $5,000, kind of like a real simple, bootstrap farm. But from there, you can instantly, get to markets. You have, all of your infrastructure that you need, and it's not a high cost, to entry. So that's our goal is to have this model to where other churches, other farmers, other people, whoever can look at this model and glean either something or take the whole thing and just apply it.
Yeah, and that's super interesting to me because I feel like we will see franchise farms in our lifetime. I think that will happen.
Yeah.
I don't know who will do it, but
Yeah.
we'll see it. And I love the idea of it being that as opposed to, the Chipotle version of farms, where it's like people who are not just like farm to table, but are genuinely somebody who understands the land, who has like a good no-till approach and something that's widely applicable and can be used, pretty instantly by anybody.
Right. And so one thing I want to put out there in the universe, and I hope someone takes this and, run with it however way they feel, is that farming the way we have it now in terms of the micro scale, I don't think it is enough to challenge our overall large, just terrible food system that we have. So I think farmers, like micro farmers like ourselves, we have to find a way to either create a system where we are all working together, or, one or two of us are going to have to build that kind of farm franchise kind of deal where we can open up a lot of small micro farms all over the place. Wherever the food access is needed, we can open those farms and get food to people. And I think that's one of the ways that we can challenge, this larger food system, and hopefully, as micro farmers, we can make a difference. But, so.
Yeah, and get people more involved in agriculture and maybe even go into some of these more food insecure areas that are practically food deserts and set up farms and places for people to come. I think that's the idea that needs to be franchised. Like that would be the franchise that I would love to see.
Yeah. And that's something that, like I said, we're working on it very hard, and I'm just testing the model with people who want to start a farm. I say, okay, here's a design. I'll help you to get this thing set up, and here's the cost. Here's what it would look like. Here's phase 1. Here's phase 2. small land space, maybe 1/8 of an acre, 1/4 acre, and you can have, go from this plain land, to having produce in less than 90 days, in a whole functioning farm. So I think that's one of the models for the future. And, I hope, somebody with some good intent, will find a way to do that, and it doesn't turn into, like that shit, that, standard, franchise thing where you're taking advantage of people. So my approach would be to set up people independently who work cooperatively versus the traditional franchise model. I hate that model on so many levels in terms of the business part of it. But I think it's important if we can work collectively, then, we can do a lot more together.
Yeah, and when I think about what the criticisms of a franchise farm would be, I think that people maybe wouldn't want to see franchise farms popping up and then taking over the market. And because they have the advantage maybe of other funding or, having a team of people come and set up a farm that, most of us don't. But I think in the situation where you're bringing it to all these different communities that don't have that I think is really interesting. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, where it's needed.
Where it's needed.
So right now, and for me, the alarm has already been rung, and I'm trying to tell my local farmers here, that, listen, guys, Silicon Valley is at the door, and they want to eat our lunch. And, there are millions of dollars pouring into the agricultural space out of Silicon Valley right now. I remember about 2 weeks ago that there was an announcement made that north of us in Danville, Virginia, one of these grow tech companies, they're building this multi-story, facility, that's going to take about 2 years to complete. And literally, dude, they're going to be growing, thousands of tons of lettuces and greens indoors year-round for the foreseeable future. So these types of farms, they're popping up all around the country, man, quietly, they're all these different models, some of them are on rooftops, some of them are going to be on top of distribution centers. Like, it's coming. You know what I'm saying? Like, whether we want it or not, it's coming. It's just about how can us, the local guys, come together and do this in a way that type of production doesn't push us out of the way, because it can easily do so, and then we're pretty much stuck with farmers market and CSAs. And then, the retail outlets are, pretty much sourcing from these places. So there is a sense of urgency, I believe, in that arena.
Yeah, I agree. In that competition, it's going to be there, and it's going to grow, especially when it comes to retail and, some of the wholesale stuff. But definitely also we're going to see it more and more in the farmers markets. I think that, I don't know if I've quoted JM Fortier on this on the podcast, but I've said it many times that I interviewed him once, and I can't even remember. It was for some article I was doing. And he said, in terms of wholesale, like they'll they have all these scientists and chemists and all these people that we'll never be able to compete with. We don't have all the wholesalers. Yeah. They have an infrastructure that we just can't compete with. But he said, they'll never be able to compete with us in terms of relationships. And I've always remembered him saying that, and always thought that's what we need to be maximizing.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree with that. And like I said, back to the local thing again, working together, but those relationships are important. As we build them with, through farmers market and all the different ways, that we contact our customers. Yes, the big guys, they can't compete there, and they'll never be able to compete there, because their overall surface is just not tangible, as we are as local farmers. So we just have to continue to protect that, and continue to grow that.
Well, Howard Allen, this has been a great conversation. So much fun to have you on.
Hey, man, thanks a lot for having me on, and I hope, that we can just continue to protect the land and, provide great food, for our local communities, one day at a time.
Absolutely.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Howard on Facebook and Instagram at Faithful Farms. All the links will be in the show notes. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it, CastBox or wherever. Hit the subscribe button. You can leave a review if you want, but only in haiku form this year. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Big thank you to Josh Satin and Jackson Roulette for their help, and enormous thank you to my wife Hannah, without whom I definitely could not do any of this. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
And something that we didn't touch on, man, but definitely, beyond just like farming, man, agritourism is such a big part of farming today.
Right.
And that's something, again, going back to the whole relationship part, that is something that we're working on just a lot of agritourism things, this year, with like once a month, pizza night, like a neighborhood pizza night, ice cream social, bringing people out to the farm to really socialize and just build community, so those are the things that I want to be able to do and just have a great time with family and community without having to be, at a farm, every single day,
I like that. That's like a sort of like a micro version of what I think of with agritourism. Like I think of agritourism as like a large mass of people coming to a farm for events and that sort of stuff. But I love the idea of it just being like a potluck on a farm for people who never get in gardens and never get on farms.
Yeah, and also too, we have an open door policy on our farm where people can come to the farm pretty much anytime, just schedule it, but also too with local groups, where they're having, different events or different get together, we open up our door and say, hey, use our space. And the whole idea is that while, they're here doing their thing, they're on a farm and, most people haven't been on the farm, sometime for their whole life or maybe, since they were kids. So just the ability to open up the space as it's not just a space for production, but it's a community space, that, we happen to also produce food here and that, we can come together. But there's something about people coming together on the land, and it's just such a beautiful thing. When people are here. Yeah, and I just want more of that, man, for people to come out and, oh my gosh, I always had this concept of a farm, and it's so nice here, we want to come back. So that to me is my biggest paycheck, is a facilitator of the soil and environment and a facilitator of the community, and farming just happened to be one of those, job titles.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. It's so, there's nothing like watching a kid pull a potato out of the ground for the first time or a carrot. They've just never thought about where they came from or how they grew. And it's just, it blows their minds.
Actually, dude, I'm making a montage right now for like the past year and a half. I've been shooting videos of just from kids all the way to grandmothers, 78-year-olds who never pulled a carrot from the ground. Uh-huh. And just been videotaping that whole experience and their reaction to it. It is priceless.
That's awesome. That'll make a great video.